Hi everyone, this is Mr. Fukowski, and the theme of day 3 will be a witch hunt. So if you recall that John Adams was dealing with a number of foreign affairs issues, specifically with the French, the quasi-war that lasted about 2.5 years that was undeclared, and how this brings about a lot of anti-French sentiment. In particular, in 1798, people are going to refuse to listen to French music. So, Federalists are in power, and they really dislike the French to begin with, and they're not really fond of immigrants to begin with. Immigrants tend to favor the Democratic Republican as much, or as many of their policies and much of their platform already favored them. But Federalists who were, all the much concerned with the elite and the wealthy, don't really care so much about immigrants. And they also want to reduce the number of Democratic Republican voters to allow more Federalists to remain in office. So one thing that they're going to do is increase the residency year, or time frame, if you will, from 5 to 14 years. It's a huge jump, nearly 3 times as many years needed to become a citizen. In addition, Federalists will also pass the Alien Enemies Act, which provides the executive branch with a lot of power to arrest and expel enemies in times of declared war. So for any reason whatsoever, the president could just kick out any enemy that he declares a threat. And think about no proof needed whatsoever. Along with that, the Alien Act also provides the president with the power to expel all aliens deemed dangerous to the peace and safety of the United States. Well, that's very ambiguous. What constitutes dangerous? Could you constitute that as someone who speaks out against the government? Maybe, and certainly there are cases of that. But probably one of the most damning parts of this law was the Sedition Act. And basically, it made it illegal to write anything false, scandalous, or malicious about the federal government. Think about which amendment that violates. The First Amendment, your right to freedom of speech and the freedom of press. So if you look at this picture over here that says the Obama birth certificate is fake, well, that is definitely false to begin with. It's scandalous and it's malicious. So technically, Barack Obama could have that person arrested. Look at this political cartoon right here. You see the sedition bills pictured as a snake, and you have the little kids here that represent honest opinion, free speech, free press, and it says as gag rulers would have it, as they want to limit what you're allowed to say. Alright, final slide here. Ending these laws. Well, they can't be appealed to the Supreme Court. We have something known as judicial review. That has not been established yet. But it doesn't even matter because the courts are already stacked with Federalist judges. Think about Washington appointing Federalist judges, John Jay in particular. They're going to support the Federalist agenda. So they're really in no mood to declare any law unconstitutional, and they don't even have that power anyways. But what's really interesting is that these laws were set to expire in 1801. Think about that. The reason why they expire in 1801 is so that they cannot be used against Federalists if they lost the next election. They don't want the Democratic Republicans to have that power anyways. I should say. But there is one interesting thing. The Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. Basically, this provides states' rights in this idea of nullification. Basically, this is Jefferson creating a law in the Kentucky legislature while James Madison is creating a law in the Virginia legislature. And basically what it says is that the states' rights will void the Alien and Sedition Acts. Remember the supremacy clause, that the federal law is the supreme law of the land. States theoretically do not have the power to declare a federal law unconstitutional. Nonetheless, under the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, they declare them void. So this sets up a very interesting predicament. Also think about the Civil War. This idea of nullification almost brings it about. I mean, you have states' rights and states' laws that are trying to nullify federal laws as well. So this also sets us up in about 65 years for the Civil War. And lastly, the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions were based upon this theory known as the contract theory, and that states were the final judges of whether the federal government exceeded its constitutional authority. But again, today, using the supremacy clause in a series of Supreme Court legal cases, they've declared that the federal law is the supreme law of the land, and that the idea of nullification, or the nullification theory as it's known today, is simply unconstitutional. and that will bring us to an end to John Adams' presidency.